Hey everyone, this is John Litteral here, and what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go over an essay that I just finished up. I've been working on it for about a month. Got it finished up, and I want to read it and show you a lot of images and stuff. And the title of this essay is called Dead Sea Scrolls, Two Fragments, 7Q1, Refuting the quote-unquote scholarly claims that it supports the Masoretic Text and not the Greek Septuagint. In this essay, I analyze the Dead Sea Scroll fragments 7Q1, also called PAP 7Q LXX Exodus. I make a refutation against the claims that some scholars make that the fragments are a Greek version that follows the readings of the Masoretic Text over the Greek Septuagint. There is a strong amount of favoritism for the Masoretic Text, which is the official Hebrew text of Rabbinic Judaism, and the standard Hebrew Old Testament that almost every Christian Bible translation is based upon. The oldest surviving manuscripts of the Masoretic text goes back to the 900s and the 1000s AD, or CE, Common Era. The Greek Septuagint was the Greek translation of the Old Testament that was translated around 250 BC, and it was the standard version of the Old Testament used by the early church and Greek-speaking Jews. The Greek Septuagint was considered by modern scholars to have many translation errors because it had numerous places where it read differently from the Hebrew Masoretic Text. After the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it was found that there were different Hebrew manuscript traditions that not only varied significantly from the Masoretic text, but evidence that the Septuagint translators had actually translated their version from another Hebrew manuscript tradition. Therefore, what was considered to be translation errors in the Septuagint was not errors at all, but translated from a different Hebrew version than the Masoretic text. Even in the early days of Christianity, Christians were criticized by Rabbinic Jews, and even were blamed to have altered the Old Testament in order to try to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. Christians also blamed Jews for changing their Hebrew version of the Old Testament in order to reject Jesus as their Messiah. But the problems from those controversies actually still cause the same debates between the Greek Septuagint supporters and the Masoretic text supporters. With the strong evidence that comes from Rabbinic Judaism on modern-day scholarship, and also the biases from those who have invested their belief system on the idea that the Bible is infallible, inerrant, and also perfect, many people in the world of biblical scholarship hold a Masoretic text supremacy, and they let their biases compromise the truth about what the data reveals. So in this essay, I point out all of the misleading claims about the 7Q1 fragments being in support of the Masoretic text of the Septuagint. Now, what you see on the screen here is an actual photocopy with also infrared to bring out the letters and the ink to where you could see it a lot better. This is actually, with the infrared, it's easier to see everything than it is just with a regular photo. And so, as you can see, at the top, the bigger fragment, that's fragment number 1, and underneath that's fragment number 2. And notice how small it is. It's not very big. In fact, there's not very many complete words. There's only 4 complete words in both of these fragments. And, there's a lot of letters, but there's parts missing. And so you basically, in order to get the full readings, people will make reconstructions. And I'll go through all this in the essay. So, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were different caves where they discovered manuscripts, mostly fragments. There's very few complete manuscripts of certain books. Obviously there's the Great Isaiah Scroll. If you know anything about the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Great Isaiah Scroll is a Hebrew scroll of the book of Isaiah. It's one of the very few that where you have a large portion of a book of the Old Testament. Most of them are fragments like this. There's, obviously there's larger fragments and stuff. This is just very tiny. But, this comes from Cave 7. But among all the Dead Sea Scrolls, Cave 7 is unique in that it contained only Greek documents with no Hebrew or Aramaic text. Among the Greek documents, the text of which can be identified with certainty are 2 papyrus fragments, which after an examination of the fibers appear to belong to each other. And they measured together about 2 inches by 7/8 of an inch and contain Exodus 28, chapter 28, verses 4 through 6, and possibly from verse number 7, which I think is kind of highly unlikely, but I will examine this in the essay. We'll go over this, and I'll give the evidence of whether it's verse 7's in or not. Since only one side has writing, it is probable that the fragments are from a roll and not from, sheets where the backside also has writing, so which is interesting. It just goes to show how old this is. Now, the uncial script is edged with small hooks, also called serifs, and these are used as in-strokes of certain letters and can be dated around 100 BC. Now, the Greek letters Alpha, Kappa, and Omega are each made with 2 strokes of the pen. Now, below here is as you can see right there, it's really tiny, but I'm not really going to focus on that bottom image there, but it's a reconstructed text that is from Bruce Metzger's book called Manuscripts of the Greek Bible: An Introduction to Greek Paleography, which the information that he put on there, he didn't put a lot of information on this on these fragments, but what he did provide was from the it's called the Discoveries in the Judean Desert series. Magnificent series that has the Dead Sea Scrolls and photographs and gives a lot of similar reconstructed text like this right here to the manuscripts. And this is one of the first examples of some scholars claiming that the fragments of 7Q1 supports the Masoretic Text of the Septuagint. We'll drop down. Now, the reconstructed text is that you saw on Bruce Metzger's is basically the same as another reconstructed text that I share below from Seth Ehorn's book, which is called Exodus and the New Testament. What one finds in the reconstructed Greek readings from these scholars is that every part of their reconstruction is not found in the actual fragments. Let me repeat that. What one finds in the reconstructed Greek readings from these scholars is that every part of their reconstruction is not found in the actual that are not found in the actual fragments is completely hypothetical. Every single letter and word found in the fragments of 7Q1 is accounted for in the Greek Septuagint. I've studied every single ink mark in these fragments, and all of the places that you can be certain what the readings are is reckoned for in the Greek Septuagint. In those places where it is uncertain what the ink mark represents is when these scholars claim that it supports the Masoretic Text of the Septuagint. And in their reconstruction, they will fill the gaps between the letters that can be seen with hypothetical readings that have absolutely no evidence whatsoever to prove that those are the true readings. And I will demonstrate this further down in my essay as I show images of the fragments to prove my case. So what you see here in this image on the screen is where I've placed the photocopy of 7Q1 from the Dead Sea Scrolls on the left side and the literal transcription on the right side. I placed question marks on each end of the readings that I am uncertain about. Both sets of letters at the bottom of fragment number 2 have question marks because while I can tell what a couple of letters are among those ink marks, I am uncertain about some of it. But I do go into detail later in the essay. So, the fragments contained in the actual copy of the manuscripts is what's called uncial script. And uncial script is how they wrote in the Greek long ago. And it's all capital Greek letters. There's no spaces in between words, and there's no punctuation. So it takes training to be able to read from the uncial script. Now, like I said, it's from what you see as uncial script, while the transcription that I have beside it there, as you can see, is just modern Greek script. And if you are reading the essay, then you probably are fully aware of the difference of the scripts of Greek there. Now, let's go down. And again, we have on the right there, we have the photocopy. And I've got it side by side with a reconstruction, a simple reconstruction of the Greek Septuagint readings that I put together. And I got it to where you can actually compare it. You can look at the manuscript and you can glance over, and I've got each line side by side. And so I line up the Greek text of the Septuagint right beside each line of the fragments so that you can easily glance and compare. And I've put the letters in bold and underlined them so that you can tell what the readings are from the fragments. And I have placed question marks around the readings that I am not completely certain about. But in the essay, I do analyze and make speculations and even refute some of the speculations made by some scholars. What I'll do is I'll zoom in, and hopefully I won't mess it up here. As you can see, the reconstructed text, the parts that's in the manuscript, I've got in bold and underlined. And as you can see in the very top, and we'll go over that here pretty soon, the very top, and that is only just a speculation that I made, but when you look at the very top of the fragment, it's just some ink marks, and it's really impossible to tell what that is. And right here is a reconstruction text that is found in Seth Ehorn's book called Exodus in the New Testament. And this reconstruction is nearly identical to the one found in the series of the discovery in the Judean desert. And I place his reconstruction again beside the actual manuscript. So that way you can take a look at it and determine for yourself. I wanted to put all the data, I want to put all the evidence and everything. And, if you're interested in this, I want you to be able to go through, and I provide everything to where you can you can decide for yourself. But I think I clearly point out that I'm correct about this. I'm 100% sure I'm correct about this. And I also provide a reconstructed text based upon, this is exactly what the text that I provide here. I just typed it out in Greek, the reconstructed text that Seth has in his book, and then also have the reconstructed text based upon the Septuagint. And what I did was I underlined the words in the text based on the Masoretic text on the parts that's not in the Septuagint. So actually the Masoretic text has more in these verses than what the Septuagint had. And so I mark all that so you can see it. Now, let me zoom in here. Here we have an image of fragment number 1. Now let's analyze this. And so in this image of the ink marks at the very top is the ink marks of fragment number 1. And the claim made by some scholars is that it would read the word adelpho, which literally translates out to, it's called two brother. That's what it would literally translate. And that is, the ink marks indicate, what they're trying to say is ink marks indicate a delta on the left side, and a phi on the right side. Now, the word brother is not found here in the Greek Septuagint, but it is in the Masoretic Text as the Hebrew word ach. But the reading of these small ink marks is very uncertain, and it could be really just about anything. It's impossible that those ink marks are from the, or it is possible that these ink marks are from the word tois, or also it could be the following word, huios, which means sons. And the first ink mark on the left is unintelligible, but the ink mark on the right looks like it could be an iota from the word tois, or the upsilon from huios. It is not an exact science at pinpointing the distance between the line lengths on a fragment like this, which has no margins that are visible, and the letters are also handwritten. All you can do is estimate. The following two lines has 7 letters missing between the known scripts, and when you count 7 letters from the top of fragment number 1 to the beginning of the following line, it lands you around the words tois huios of the Greek Septuagint reading. I add tois huios in some of the reconstructions below, but I am in no way do I seriously consider that to be certain, just pure speculation. So let's take a look at these images below here. Now, these 3 images, the one on the far left is the ink marks, or the ink mark at the very top of the fragment on the right side, while the other 2 are letters that the ink mark could be, such as an iota and an upsilon. Some scholars claim that the top right ink mark is a phi. At first glance, it looks possible, but when you compare it to another phi in another fragment in Cave 7, since 7Q1 does not have a phi, the bottom stroke of the phi comes down much lower than all the other letters. So let's take a look at this. This image right here is an upsilon and a phi, and this comes from also Cave 7 in 7Q LXX Epistle of Jeremiah. So on the left there is an upsilon, and on the right is a phi. Look how far that phi goes down. And so when you look below at the image of fragment number 1 with the arrows, there's fragment number 1, a close-up, and I see where I put the arrows, and I've got them pointed just exactly right at the ink marks at the top of the fragment. And you can tell that the ink mark on the left is basically level with the ink mark on the right. This is very significant to look at, to see here. Therefore, the image below allows you to compare the top fragment number 1 to an upsilon and a phi found in another fragment. Now notice the phi here drops down significantly farther than the upsilon. And upsilons, oftentimes drop down more than a lot of other letters in the fragments. So this demonstrates that some scholars are wrong about the ink marks at the top of fragment number 1 indicating adelpho. It's just not possible. Again, look at the top of the fragment. Look where the arrows are pointing at the ink marks. They're basically level. And if that was a phi on the right, it would be dropping down a lot farther than the other ink mark. Just drop down. Now we're going to point out something about the line lengths, but first, what I want to talk about is the claim. So the claim that's made by some scholars in order to make it appear that 7Q1 supports the Masoretic text, they try to say that, hypothetically, they say, oh, that would be adelpho. The pattern that I see with these 2 7Q1 fragments is that each time the readings are unintelligible, some scholars choose to pick words that support the Masoretic text over the Septuagint, because that upholds a narrative that certain scholars prefer in order to convey a supremacy of the Masoretic text over the Septuagint. But what I see in these choices in the transcription are hypothetical reconstructions. Every single intelligible reading in these 2 fragments of 7Q1 are in support of the Septuagint. To make his case that these fragments support the Masoretic text over the Septuagint, Seth E. Horn, in his book Exodus in the New Testament on page 25, uses terms like strongly suggest or seems to evidence in those places when it is not possible to be sure what the readings are. He also makes the case, like I've seen many times when scholars make similar cases in other manuscript readings. He will use the argument that line lengths would suggest a reading that supports the Masoretic text over the Septuagint because the distance between the words that you see in each line is either longer or shorter than what supports the Septuagint. Now, predicting the length of the readings in the manuscript from line to line, especially when you have no margins showing on either side, of 7Q1. It is not an exact calculation. It cannot be. For one, the manuscript's handwritten, and the script is not 100% predictable like it would be on a typewriter or computer or Word, on a Word document. Secondly, which is the most important part, is many handwritten manuscripts that are complete in their entirety. You can see that the beginning of each line might be fairly even all the way down, but most lines at the other end of the line are all uneven from one another. In fact, when you look at this fragment here, this is a section of another Dead Sea Scrolls fragment from the Minor Prophets called HEV, which stands for Nehal Hever, 12GR. That's just the name of the manuscript. The right side of the readings are not lined up perfectly, as you can tell. Look at that. Rather, they have different numbers of letters per row. Even 7 letters differences, just like in 7Q1. It is not possible to be certain what the letter lengths are in 7Q1 when both sides of the margins no longer exist. Therefore, only speculation can be made about the letter lengths in the fragments of 7Q1. So there's absolutely no concrete evidence to any of the claims by Seth E. Horn. He relies upon a hypothetical and a shoulda, coulda, woulda argument, as do many scholars who are towing the line of the Masoretic text supremacy. Now let's move on to a variant reading in 7Q1. And as you can see, here's the second line of 7Q1. I've got it focused in here. I'll zoom in a little more so you can see it. Now, the second line of 7Q1 does have what would be considered a variant Septuagint reading, which reads Atu ha'ir teve moi. The standard Septuagint reading has Atu eis ta ha'ir teve moi. This fragment omits eis ta. This does not change the meaning nor how it would be translated. If you translate the variant reading versus the standard, what's standard in there, when you add eis ta in there, it doesn't change it whatsoever. This word order is also found a little later in Exodus chapter 31, verse 10, where the eis ta was not added between Atu ha'ir teve. Perhaps the omission of the eis ta is the original reading for Exodus chapter 28, verse 4, and that it may have been added later by a copyist and eventually became the standard reading. Now, Seth E. Horn, following some other scholars, makes the case that the reading would support the Masoretic text and suggests that Atan would come after ha'ir teve, and the text would read Atu ha'ir teve Atan moi. Again, this is completely hypothetical and has no concrete evidence to prove this reading. But Seth does list a few medieval Greek manuscripts that had that reading, such as manuscript 72, which is a 13th century manuscript, and also manuscript 376, which is a 15th century manuscript, and a correction in a 11th century manuscript called manuscript 318. And citing those as manuscript evidence is a weak attempt at towing the Masoretic text line. Now, let's take a look at line number 8 in the fragment number 1 of 7Q1. As you can see here, I've got the image there at the top. It has an omega. Now, if epomida is the correct reading, which I think that it is, as do most scholars, then the P, and when I say P, that's the way I was trained in Erasmian Greek, how to pronounce P. I know that modern day they call it pi, but yeah, I call it P. So for the sake of this essay, I'm just going to go with P. So then the P preceding the omega has an unusual hook at the bottom right of the letter. As you can see the arrow, I've got an arrow pointing at that serif, that hook. Now perhaps that is the way that the copyist of 7Q1 wrote it, but there is no other letter P on those fragments to compare it to. Now, I did look it up I found another P and a fragment in the Greek Minor Prophets, and I found one that did have a little bit of a hook there, just like this. Now, the next one here is where, this is just an example, and I made my own little etch, and so that's what I made, which probably resembles what the P looked like beside the omega. So there's really nothing significant that I'm trying to point out here. But when I first was examining this manuscript, and when I've studied ancient Bible manuscripts, most of the time the P never did have a hook like this. And so I just wanted to study it, confirm it, and sure enough, I have run on to where other fragments and other manuscripts do have a hook on the P. So let's move on. I don't want to ramble too much about that. Now let's take a look at the bottom of fragment number 1, which I think is probably the 9th line. This is the very bottom of it. Notice on the image on the left there. And so the one on the left, the image on the left, is the actual fragment, and I've circled something that I'm going to actually talk about. The very bottom of fragment 1 is somewhat unintelligible. Now, Seth E. Horn claims that the reading supports the Masoretic text by reading huakinthu, or huakinthu. When closely examining the ink marks, it is possible that the first marks that appear could be the top of the letter kappa, and the last letter could be a nu. But it could very well be something different, because it is not really possible to be 100% certain. But the claim that the middle letter is an iota is completely out of the question. So at first glance, from an inexperienced eye, it looks like it could possibly be an iota. But when you compare it with the other iotas from the very same fragment of 7Q1, it is obvious that it is not, because all other iotas in a fragment have a hook that sticks out to the left. Below, right here, as you can see the images. Now, the one on the left there is from the bottom of fragment 1, and that's what I got circled there is what Seth E. Horn claims to be an iota. Now, when you look on the right, that's an actual iota from the fragment. They don't look anything alike. And so if that was an iota, that the one that's circled there on the left would have a hook sticking out, and it does not. So the image on the left is the ink marks in question, and in the ink mark that is circled is what Seth E. Horn claims, and other scholars also claim, is an iota. And the image on the right is an iota 3 lines above the same fragment. Those are obviously not the same letters. Regardless of what it is, it does not support the reading that Seth E. Horn is suggesting. Without having more exposure to the ink marks, which have been lost due to time and being fragment, it is better to settle with uncertainty. I have absolutely no problem claiming to be uncertain about something, especially when it's just impossible to be 100% sure. Now, if I had to speculate, I would suggest the existing ink marks are the nu and the eta found in the word keklosmenes. This would account for what I mentioned above about the one ink mark not having a hook, which rules out it being an iota. The only place in the fragment 4 lines above that has an eta has no hook, and it is similar to the mark being mentioned. So let's take a look. Zoomed in there. So the image on the left is the mark in question, and I've got it circled so you can see. That's what he calls an iota. But the one on the right is part of an eta that is 4 lines above, and that eta is only partial because the fragment stops and it does not reveal the rest of the letter, but it is agreed that it is an eta. That looks more likely to be what that is in that the bottom of fragment number 1 that is circled. And so, you know, that looks far more likely than the iota that recommended by some scholars. Now let's take just right down below here. Now I've got an image, a close-up of the ink marks from the bottom of fragment number 1 there on the left. And on the right is my etch that shows that the possible reading, which I do recommend, which is a nu and an eta. And etching it fits perfect. And which supports reading from the Septuagint. And you'll find it in the reconstructions when you look on the reconstructions. We'll go back to that here in a little bit. Now, fragment number 2, let's examine this. This one's real interesting. Fragment number 2 of 7Q1 is not easy to figure out. As you can see in this image on the screen, that's a close-up of fragment number 2. As you can see, there's not much to it. And I think that the reading could possibly belong to another place in the book of Exodus, or even somewhere else in the Septuagint. Seth E. Horn and some scholars do suggest that the reading in fragment number 2 has the words that are found in the Septuagint, that being esantai, and then heteron. Some scholars do appear to admit that it is difficult to be certain if those are the correct readings, because in their transcription, they in their in their transcription and reconstruction, they'll put little dots under the letters that they're uncertain about, and I'll show you right here. Let's see if I can zoom in on it. It's kind of hard to here on my phone. As you can see, I've circled the what they've reconstructed here, and the words, and underneath each, or the letters underneath of each letters, you got the sigma there at the top, and omega and a nu, and they've got dots underneath them. And what that is they're just saying that it's hard to see. They're uncertain about it. At least they're being honest about that. And then the heteron, and you got the ru and the alpha with dots underneath that, meaning that that's uncertain. It's hard to see, but it is confirmed that the others are recognizable. Now, I highly doubt that fragment number 2 is what it's claimed to be by some scholars, especially the top of esantai. Now let's move down and check out the images here. In fact, I point out that I at least show here that there's no way that it's what they claim that it is. Now, the image on the left, as you see on the screen, top left, has fragment number 2, and the right side of it is images of an actual sigma, and then an omicron and a nu from fragment number 1. So, by comparing them side by side, only the nu looks like it possibly matches. The omicron looks very unlikely, because even if we consider that fragment number 2 was an omicron with faded ink, the size of the omicron would be significantly larger than any other omicron in fragment number 1. As for the sigma, which in uncial script looks like a capital C, it does not look like the ink mark in fragment number 2 supports the likelihood of being a sigma. And I will settle with uncertainty about what the top of fragment number 2 reads. But here's something interesting. I did throw this in there just for fun. And what you see here, and I'll just zoom in on it. So now this is an image that is intriguing. And that's when you actually take fragment number 1, the bottom of fragment number 1, and the top of fragment number 2 and place them together. And it looks like they could match. But in order for this to match, it looks like an omicron is possible, but there would have to be a significant amount of ink that would be faded out. And the first letter would be distorted. The first letter is distorted and hard to identify. Strangely, the photo of fragments number 1 and 2 connected together looks slightly different because the potential omicron doesn't look as wide as it does in the other image. And this is likely because the image of the fragments together are of lesser quality than the other that are enhanced by infrared. So like I said, I just wanted to throw that in there for fun. I seriously doubt that they were meant to be placed together like that. But I looked at it and I thought, well, that does look interesting. So let's take a look at the images here that we have on the top. And so on the far left side of these images is the reading from fragment number 2 at the bottom. On the right side are images from fragment number 1 that have the letters that are being suggested by Seth Ehorn and other scholars for fragment number 2. It looks possible and perhaps likely, but if that is correct, then the roux in fragment number 2 looks a little different due to the fact that all other fragments in fragment number 1 that have a roux do not cross through the middle on the left side of the letter that we see in the image above on fragment number 2. Perhaps the scribe was a little sloppy. But take a look at this. And this really caught my attention because this is where I think it's possible that this is not even from Exodus, that fragment number 2 is not even from Exodus chapter 28, that it could possibly be from another place in the Septuagint. Sorry for the background. The dogs are howling. I think they heard an emergency vehicle. They're singing the blues. So, one possibility about fragment number 2 is that it is part of the same manuscript in another section of the Septuagint. Instead of the third letter being a roux, it does look similar to a spi. And the only place that I can find in the Septuagint that has a 2 epsilon and a spi is in the book of the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 8, with the word stepsometha. When you compared the letter in fragment number 2 with another spi from cave number 7, they look very similar to one another. And so what I did was I took a spi from 7QLXX from the Epistle of Jeremiah and from the very same cave. And it's on the right. Now look on fragment number 2. They really look almost exactly alike. Even on the bottom, you've got that hook, and connecting the middle letter to a spi. And on the right, I think it's highly unlikely. I really think, the more I look at it, the more I examine it, I think that fragment number 2 is not even part of Exodus 28. Now let's move down here, and this is just something little extra I threw in there. I put together I've got the fragment, and I put together just a Greek and English interlinear. And what I'll do is I'll zoom in. And so, as you can see, my reconstruction, and every word in the fragments provide an English equivalent under each word. And that's just for those who are interested. If you don't know Greek, then you can actually look and see. And also I provided beside it an English translation. And as I was proofreading it yesterday, I noticed a little error that I put, just a little minor error, and I'll point it out myself, and I'll actually redo the, I'll make a correction in this. I can't believe I let this one slip by me. But right before verse 5, says, "For Aaron and his sons to serve as priests to me." And unfortunately I put as priest. The as priest is not, that's just an extra, and I just messed up. So calling myself out, showing where I made a minor error in this translation. But that's the only thing. It's innocent. I'll correct it. Just goes to show I was trying to finish this essay up and just was in a hurry and let that one slip by. But this is the translation, and the words that are in bold and underlined is what's within the fragment. And that is a translation of the Greek Septuagint that I put together there of that passage. And so at the end of the essays, I put the sources that I quoted from and alluded to. And so I alluded to and quoted a little bit from Bruce Metzger in his book called The Manuscripts of the Greek Bible, an introduction to Greek paleography, also from the discoveries from the Judean desert series. Took some images from that, and also from Seth Ehorn's book Exodus in the New Testament. So that wraps it up, folks. I hope this is helpful, and so I appreciate you all. If you have any questions, comment in the comment section, and I'll do the best to answer questions. Or if there's any observations that you made that I haven't caught, just let me know. I would appreciate it. And so, folks, I appreciate you all. Take care. Have a good day.